Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today we are taking a look at the brand new Battle Region cards that were announced overnight whilst I was asleep. But there's some really interesting cards here. You can see that we've got the Syrian forms coming in from the new games. We've got the new sparkling Pokemon. So yeah, really interesting stuff. Just before we kick off, if you're looking for TCG codes, including Brilliant Stars on the 25th of Feb, make sure you check out the Potown store where you can use 5%. You can get a 5% off your order using code Omnipoke. So yeah, some really interesting cards. As always, we're going to start down at the trainers because that kind of gives us a scope of what is possible in multiple different decks. Kicking things off with Turbo Store. Turbo Store is an item that says you can only use this going second and on your first turn. Search it for a basic energy and attach to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. So essentially, it's like, imagine VIP Pass, but even more restrictive because you have to be going second. That makes it a pretty niche card. It's only useful in 50% of matchups, and then you have to find it. Obviously, you also then are probably going to want to play a decent number of this card, maybe even 4, just to find it on your first turn if you're going second. So it's a bit of a weird one. The effect is nice. I mean, attaching an extra energy is great. But we have a lot of different ways to accelerate energy for a lot of different types now, so I don't actually think this is that relevant. I think almost all of the types have some fairly admirable energy acceleration in some capacity now, so I think the restrictions on this card are just too much to make it particularly playable, unfortunately. Honey says, choose one of your Pokemon, then flip a coin until you get tails. For each heads, heal 40 damage from that Pokemon. The only real reason I could see this being played is in some of these quad tanky VMAX decks, things like Metagross. I think there's Colossal. I think Stone is another one that's doing alright right now. Dracozolt was the original one. It's the only reason I can really see a card like this seeing play. In typical decks, it's not that strong. And even in those decks, it might not be strong enough. You might just prefer the guaranteed. So this is directly comparable to Lucky Ice Pop, right? Lucky Ice Pop is a guaranteed 20. And then you flip a coin and you can put it back into your hand. This is a flip a coin for a 40. So it scales quicker, but obviously you're guaranteed 0 healing. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't think the effect is particularly powerful outside of these quad VMAX tanky decks, and even then they might just prefer the guaranteed 20 heal of Lucky Ice Pop. We actually have a lot of healing right now, so this has a lot to compete with, to be honest. But yeah, Counseling Cologne is a really interesting one. This is another item. Your opponent's active Pokemon has no abilities until the end of this turn, including Pokemon that move to the active spot during this turn. So when we come across a couple of other cards later, this could be really relevant. But in general, this is really interesting. At the moment, the only way to get around things like Duraludon, Decidueye, I mean, that's not particularly relevant, but that's another one. All of these abilities that block Pokemon from being damaged or whatever is through ability lock in some capacity, Path to Peak, whatever, or for VMAX is through Phoebe. This essentially gives every deck a splashable way to get through some of these walling archetypes, which is really interesting. I don't think this will completely cut them off, because again, similar to things like Manaphy and stuff, it will be, are people playing this Cancelling Cologne that is essentially a dead card in a lot of instances. And I think it's a pretty bad card, to be honest. In some cards are at least playable or at least admirable in the matchups that they're not useful in in a tech capacity. But Cancelling Cologne pretty much just straight up does nothing outside of just being able to attack through a wall. It doesn't stop your opponent. It's not like Hex Maniac, which stopped them until the following turn. It just straight up just stops them having ability immediately. So it's a pretty bad card outside of exactly things like Duraludon matchups, Decidueye matchups. There's a new Miltank, that would be immune to certain Pokemon. I can't remember which ones, but we'll take a look shortly. So that's the only real use for Cancelling Cologne. And whilst that is a really important use, and it could mean decks like Duraludon do go up and down in play a little bit, Duraludon looks to be a really big winner from Brilliant Stars, to be honest. So yeah, this hurts it directly, but I don't know whether people will actually want to play this card because it is straight up just useless in a lot of other situations. It's an insta play, which can be relevant for things like Genesect, for things like Crobat. You don't have to hold this in any matchup that you don't want to, because you can always play this card. But yeah, like it feels like it's a card that you really don't particularly want to see in the top like 30 cards of your deck, because generally against these walling decks you get to take the first few prizes and then they'll build a wall for you to have to get through. And if you see it in the first half of your deck, it feels pretty bad. So yeah, it's a really interesting card. It's like a mini Hex Maniac. Very, very mini. But interestingly, yeah, I don't think it's strong enough, because you don't want to see it in like the first half of your deck, and there's only going to be one or maybe at most two, maybe three, I guess. 2 or 3 matchups that is actually going to be useful in. The rest of the time it's completely dead. So yeah, I don't think it will see play. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. Silene is a supporter card. This isn't using the Ken Sugimori artwork, which is interesting. I think this is one of the first. I mean, I don't know whether we have Sugimori artwork for these new characters from Arceus, but this is one of the first like actual characters outside of like Dancer or Schoolboy and Schoolgirl or anything like that, that isn't using Sugimori artwork, which is cool. Supporter card, flip 2 coins for each heads, choose a card from your discard pile and put it on top of your deck in any order. This very much reminds me of Opal. You've got to assume if you're playing a card like this, you probably have a way to draw into those cards. So yeah, basically very much reminds me of Opal, but from the discard pile instead of the deck. Arguably, in the late game, this is better than Opal because you've used all your resources, but again, Opal's seeing no play, right? So I don't have any reason to believe this will see any play over it. Roxanne is a really interesting one. Roxanne is another supporter. You can only play this card if your opponent has 3 or less prize cards. Okay, so that's huge. Initial translations was less than 3, so if this is 3 or less, bear in mind there could still be some minor changes come to these translations down the line, but if your opponent has 3 or less prize card is huge, because that means it's only 1 VMAX knockout, it's only a V and like a 1 prize Pokemon like a Mew or anything like that, or a Meloetta, anything like that, which is cool. Both players shuffle their hands into their decks, you draw 6 and your opponent draws 2. So, immediate comparison is to Ace Trainer. Ace Trainer was a card back from Primal Clash that said, I think if you were behind on prizes at all, you shuffle draw 6, they shuffle draw 3. So they get 1 less card in this instance, but they have to be on less than 3 or 3 or less prize cards. I think this is huge, to be honest. I think this is a very, very strong card. A lot of people are comparing it to Ace Trainer and saying like, oh, Ace Trainer didn't actually see that much play in the format, which is true, but it was a lot more limiting, and because you had to, well, it wasn't a lot more limiting because it was easier to be behind on prizes, but from what I remember, there was basically no way to tutor out supporters in that format. I can't remember, because Jirachi had rotated, or Jirachi was going to rotate at Worlds, I believe. I could be slightly wrong with that, but I think it was harder to use. I think it's a harsher comparison to Ace Trainer than it may seem. Immediately, your opponent draws 1 less card, which is huge, because 2 cards is really not a nice amount of cards. But on top of this, it's also more hand disruption that isn't Marnie. Marnie right now doesn't feel like good hand disruption. This actually feels like good hand disruption. Being able to Roxanne plus Path is way, way scarier than Marnie Path. And Marnie Path right now can still cheese some decks. So I really do think Roxanne is a pretty strong card. We have Luminion as well to be able to tutor this out. Obviously it's pretty bad early game. Well, it's very bad early game. It's basically useless. But we have Luminion to tutor out in the late game, which is interesting. Another very interesting thing to note is I think this is a pretty bad card for Mew. We were talking last night on stream about how to fix Mew, and I think there's a couple of cards that they've made here that very much could be fixing Mew, or could be fixing the Mew problem by basically giving every other deck cards that Mew can't really play, because Mew can't really play this. It's too much of a dead card early. At least with Marnie you can play it immediately. You really can't play this, I don't think. And Mew also hates it in conjunction with Path. Obviously, because they have so many ways to draw. The draw 2 cards, only drawing 2 cards isn't actually that big of a downside, because they probably still Genesect up to like 6 or 5. But it does mean that Roxanning and pathing really does potentially stop them in their tracks, to be honest. Basically, like the way you can get around it right now is by Rotom phoning a stadium to the top, so that if they Marnie, they Marnie back into the stadium and they can bounce the path. You can't do that with Roxanne because you shuffle your full hand into your deck and then shuffle the deck. So yeah, I think Roxanne is actually a really strong card, to be honest. I don't think it's going to be like played in huge counts, but I think this in combination with Luminion could mean that at the right time this could completely turn the tide of a game, and it works at least on par with Marnie, I think, because you've got to assume, like, yeah, it's better than Marnie against Mew also, I think, because they only get 2 cards, they probably have to immediately Genesect up should you not have a path down. Whereas with Marnie, if you Marnie them, they get to play some cards first, thin the deck, blah blah blah, then draw up. But realistically, I think there's going to be a lot of situations where after you've been Roxanne, the first action you have to make as a Mew player is Genesecting back into a decent hand size to be able to then manage your turn. So that also means that they have one less Genesect, like, arguably straight away, which is interesting. The maths is kind of weird on that, but it does mean that you do get rid of some draw power from them as well, indirectly as well as directly. So yeah, I think Roxanne is pretty powerful. Not going to be a 4 or anything, but it could be a 4 of in like more controlling archetypes, actually, to be honest. Not a 4 of, but it could be played in higher counts in a more controlling archetype potentially. But yeah, I think this is a fairly splashable hand disruption card, and obviously Mai rotates at the end of the year, so then we'll have literally 0 hand disruption. So this will definitely be better then. But it might almost be better than Marnie hand disruption now. I'm pretty sure it is. Kamado is the final supporter. Discard all cards from your hand except 1, then draw 4 cards. This is a really interesting one. What's this comparable to? Comparable to Peony, I guess, in a sense. Peony sort of pretty flash in the pan success in Mew. This I think is worse than that because drawing 4 cards, I would say, is probably worth. Drawing 4 cards and keeping 1 card is probably worse than tutoring 2 item cards, because items can basically get you anything. Medium. This is an interesting one for things like stage 2 decks and stuff that get to discard all of their hand bar the rare candy or bar the stage 2 or whatever. There's something loud outside my room. Bar the one of the combo pieces they need, right? They don't want to play research, or they have to play research, but it kind of feels bad when you're holding a candy and you have to research it away, right? So it's pretty interesting for stage 2 decks. I think it's still not good enough draw power in those decks to actually feasibly come up with anything strong. But yeah, it's an interesting supporter. I don't think it's strong enough though. Finally, Jublife Village is a trainer. Is a stadium that says once during each player's turn, that player may shuffle their hand of the deck. If they do, draw 5 cards and their turn ends. This is a really interesting one. This is like a baby Beach. It's not as strong as Beach, obviously, because I think drawing up to 7 is stronger than Shuffle 5. But having something to do at the end of your turn, a bit like Zacian's drawing cards or Snorlax's drawing cards, having something to do is never a bad thing. I just can't really see what deck would play this. I think a lot of decks right now have stadiums they want to play, and I can't see, because you'd want to play this in a high count, because you'd basically only ever want to use it turn 1, I think, because most of the time from turn 2 onwards you need to be attacking in this format. So you'd only want to use it on turn 1, so you'd have to play it in a high enough count to find it on turn 1. And the problem is, like I say, I'm pretty sure a lot of decks already have stadiums they want to play, and that are probably better than this from turn 2 onwards. So unfortunately, I can't see a deck that this goes in. Maybe some of like the stage 2 archetypes or the single bros archetypes, potentially. But even then, like, you don't want to clog your deck with 4 Jublife Village just to find it turn 1, just to shuffle draw 5, when you're already having to play rare candies and stage 2s and stuff. So yeah, I don't think this is quite strong enough. But yeah, the Lucario and Darkrai decks we've kind of gone over already. Lucario seems like a pretty interesting one. I'm just going to super speed through these because, like I say, I've already done a video on these. But Lucario and Darkrai both seem pretty interesting. Lucario has a 50 discard of special and a 120 attack. And then the V-Star does 120 plus 120 more, so that's 240. To a Pokemon V, which is actually very relevant numbers. Even with, this is obviously 2 colorless cost, but even with a Turbo Energy, you're still doing 220, which is still a great number. So that's pretty interesting. 220 plus a Choice Band is 250. Choice Belt. So you're even close to maybe one-shotting V-Star Pokemon, which is cool. You're already one-shotting the Arceus, but there's going to be a couple more, like 270, 280 HP Pokemon that you might even be able to reach into. So yeah, pretty interesting numbers, to be honest. Pretty heavy attack cost, which is kind of unfortunate, but even so. And then Aura Star does 70 times the number of energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon. So again, another nice big blow-up attack that we've kind of seen these attacks be. Unfortunately, I don't think there's too many Pokemon that this actually affects, really. It feels like against a lot of Pokemon, Fighting Knuckle is almost going to be doing more damage than Aura Star. Obviously, it's one less energy, but yeah, so that's interesting. A lot of the rest of this stuff is filler. There's a 1 for 60 on Pokemon V, which is pretty interesting. Cleaver has Scatter, which looks like it's Mind Jack, which is pretty cool. So yeah, this could be a a fighting Pokemon for one of these like twin energy decks. Gutsy Pickaxe lets you basically draw the top card of your hand, and if it's a fighting energy attached to one of your benched Pokemon, it's pretty cool. I think it's meant to be benched fighting Pokemon. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this translation is slightly incorrect. I think it should be benched fighting Pokemon. But yeah, pretty interesting energy acceleration. This is what I mean. I feel like every type has this kind of energy acceleration now. Or some energy acceleration in some capacity. We've got a Hisuian Quillfish and Overquill. This one's quite interesting. Dirty Press does 1 for 120 if you have at least 3 dark energy attached to your Pokemon. That's not really that difficult with Dark Patch that I'll go over momentarily. So 1 for 120 isn't bad. 150 with a Choice Belt, so you're only 10 damage off KOing a Mew. You are a stage 1 though, which is kind of awkward, and that 10 damage is a little bit harder than it may seem because a lot of the time you can't Zigzagoon ping them. So yeah, but Hisuian Overquill actually has a decent attack, which is cool. And then Darkrai we've discussed, 2 for 50 and 3 for 130 and Sleep, and then the V-Star has for 2 colorless energy, 30 plus 30 for each dark attached to your Pokemon. So you need 4 dark energy on your board and a Choice Belt attached to this Darkrai to be able to one-shot a Mew. That's kind of the gold standard right now, because that'll be doing 360. So yeah, honestly, that does seem fairly plausible. We have Dark Patch, we have Moltres, we have just manual attachments, we have Baby Moltres. We have a lot of ways to get dark energy in play. So yeah, pretty interesting one. I'm not sold that this will be the answer to Mew, rather than just more cards that Mew can't play that other decks can. But this does seem like a pretty solid counter to Mew, to be honest. And then Star Abyss is also really good. So it's your discard pile for 2 item cards and put them into your hand as your V-Star power once per game. So yeah, very, very strong card. And then the Hooper we've also discussed, and there should be a Dark Patch somewhere on here as well. Dark Patch is the final card from that deck. So yeah, onto the full set, or the rest of the Pokemon. I'm going to kind of turbo through this because I also have work in an hour and a half. So we're going to turbo through some of these, but a lot of it is filler. Vileplume has Allergy Storm, 3 for 90 for a coin of heads. Your opponent can't play any supporters. Tails, they can't play any items. Pretty funny, but it's a stage 2 with a 3 energy attack cost, so it's just never going to get set up. Heracross does 120 and 31 of your own bench. That's pretty pants. Roserade does 60, and if your opponent's active Pokemon is affected by a special condition, it does 60 Snipe as well. That's pretty interesting. 2 energy again is pretty awkward though, especially when they're not. It's not DCE. Also, I don't think we have a great way. Oh, we have things like Garbodor to auto poison the opponent, which is interesting. But 60-60 just isn't enough damage, to be honest. Even like 60-90 with the what's it called, the telescopic sight, that's not really enough damage either. This doesn't trade well into your Darkrai as well. Darkrai is weak to grass, but it doesn't trade well into Darkrai either, because you do 90 times 2 is 180, and then with a 60 snipe that's 140. Sorry, that's 240. That's still not enough damage to be able to two-shot a Darkrai, or two-shot 2 Darkrai's. So yeah, not very good. Combi has Honey Step and lets you search for an item card, and then Vespiquen has Honey Rush, 60 times the number of Honey item cards you reveal from your hand. This attack does 60 for each card revealed this way. It's a lot of damage for 1 energy on a 1-prize Pokemon, to be honest. But with things like Marnie and stuff, it could be difficult to actually accrue this hand combo. And also you could end up prizing them, which is kind of awkward. Damage output is decent though, 240, with a belt it's 270. That's carrying a lot of V star Pokemon, which is pretty huge. Also, you only need 3 or 2 and a belt to one-shot a Darkrai, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, this could see a little bit of play. I'm not sold on how consistent it will be. You don't want to have to prize them. You're kind of already scared of Marnie because you're a 1-prize deck, but then also because your damage output is based in your hand. So you'd probably have to play it with like Inteleons to tutor them out should that happen. Which sounds kind of gross, but because they obviously go to the bottom, so you can't like just raw draw Cincino into them a lot of the time without some kind of shuffle card first. Yeah, I think you'd have to play it with Inteleon realistically, and I think that's just going to be too slow. But interesting damage. Version V has Grassland Wind. Your opponent with Grass Energy can't be affected by special conditions. Not hugely relevant, but because there's not a huge amount of special conditions right now, but it's a perfectly fine ability to have, right? And then Emerald Blade does 200 damage, and this Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. What grass acceleration do we have? We have Rillaboom for everything. We have Cherrim for 1 prizes. I feel like we must have better attackers than 3 for 200 for Virizion, to be honest. So, yeah, I don't think this is strong enough. 3 for 200 just isn't enough damage on a basic V when you can just do 210 for 2 with Meloetta. Hard sell. The biggest sell is the fact that this one-shots a Darkrai always, but we have to have more efficient attacks than 3 for 200 to one-shot a Darkrai, I'm pretty sure. Okay, Sparkling Heatran is the first Sparkling Pokemon we'll talk about today. You can only have 1 Sparkling Pokemon in your deck. This is the first, there's 3, there's this one, Greninja and Hawlucha. Heatran has Raging Bomber, it has 160 HP by the way, has Raging Bomber, 70 damage times the number of damage counters on this Pokemon. That's a huge multiplier, and realistically you can get this set up in a turn because you can Magma Basin plus Twin Energy to it. You can't Twin Energy to it, this is a Rule Box Pokemon, so you have to double Turbo to it, which means you're capping your damage at 20 minus. So if you have the two counters from Magma Basin, you're doing 140. 20 minus, that's 120 times 2, assuming you're hitting into something with weakness, that's 240. 300 with a Choice Belt. Seems like a lot of work, to be honest. You'd already be playing a Fire deck, and you've got to assume there's probably Fire Pokemon in the Fire deck that can do 150 a bit easier than having to play Double Turbo and Magma Stadium and get it all in one turn. So, if you set this up across 2 turns, you're doing realistically 280 for 3, which isn't bad. It's pretty good damage, to be honest. You have to have double Magma Basin to it, though. Seems like the weakest of the 3, though, I think. Very strong modifier, but I just don't see a format where we have time. Maybe this goes in like an Entei deck, where the deck is relatively low maintenance anyway, and you can also Raihan in those kinds of decks. So you can just like passively build up Sparkling Heatran with your Basin, get up to 4 damage counters, get up to 280 damage, and then explode. Interesting. I'm not sold, but sounds a bit better in like an Entei style deck, I guess. Interesting. Litwick and Lampen aren't too relevant. This has discard the top card from your opponent's deck, which is, and this has discard an energy on a coin flip. Both of those are kind of relevant for the style of deck you're going to be playing, I guess. Mountain Burner on Chandelure says once during your turn when you play this card to evolve a Pokemon, you may discard the top 3 cards from your opponent's deck. So we've seen this on Agrons, on Riperias. They've never been great. They've always been like Hue cards or anything like that. The only one that kind of broke the model a little bit was Riperia and Meganium. But yeah, I can't expect this to be that good considering it's a stage 2. There's a lot of decks that turbo through their deck right now. Primarily Mew, to be honest, and it would hate seeing you discard 3 cards a couple of times. But realistically, do you ever get set up against Mew? Probably not. And I think I think decks that don't turbo through their deck are going to be hard anyway, because your damage output is 2 for 90 if you're trying to do it like that. So yeah, pretty pants overall, I think. Hitleo and Pyro. Pyro has Scorching Aura, put 4 damage counters on the opponent's burned Pokemon instead of 2. Again, an ability we've seen before that's never been hugely relevant, usually on like a Volcarona or whatever. We have no way of like insta burning anything, so it's not a strict upgrade of damage. There's even its attack, Firefang, you have to flip a coin for the burn. So yeah, pretty mediocre. Starmie for 2 colorless has the Swift attack that does 50. And this basically goes through all effects, including weakness and the resistance. Not enough damage to really be super relevant. 50 is just not a lot of damage. So even like into these walling decks, it's really not going to be particularly strong. An Energy Spiral does, for 2 water energy, does 50 times the number of energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon. Excuse me. This could be a really interesting tech in Melanie decks if Darkrai gets super popular. Because if they're flooding the board with Dark Energy to try and one-shot your Ice Riders or your Suicunes or whatever, you can return KO with a Starmie, attach Melanie, Energy Spiral, and they only need 6 on board, 5 if you have a Choice Belt on you, to one-shot a Darkrai, and 5 energy doesn't sound like a lot. It sounds like they're going to have 5 energy a lot of the time, especially given that 5 energy plus Choice Belt only just KOs a Suicune, so if they've missed the... Yeah, that is right. So if they've missed the tool, or you have a cape on, or you're playing anything stronger than a Suicune, or anything with more HP than a Suicune, they're going to have more energy on the board. So yeah, seems like it could be a pretty cool tech for Melanie decks. If Darkrai does become incredibly popular. Outside of that, I don't think it's strong enough. You're not doing enough against Mew because realistically... well, it depends whether... It says number of energy rather than energy cards, so it might mean double turbo counts for 2. But even so... I don't think you're ever doing enough to Mew to be able to KO them. They'd need 6 energy, plus you'd need Choice Belt. Because you can't really rely on ping damage. So yeah, I don't think it's quite strong enough against Mew, but it could be a very interesting tech against Dark decks. We've got a Swinub, we've got a Piloswine, and we've got a Mamoswine. Yeah, stage 2 Clunk, unfortunately. Really cool art though, look at this art. Let's go. Barboche and Wishcash, again, pretty bulk. Hisuian Basculin has Schooling that is basically Call for Family for 2 basics, which is pretty cool because you don't have to spend an energy card on it. So outside of Mincino decks, this is the new best Call for Family Pokemon. Or I guess outside of Mincino decks and probably an Inteleon decks, which realistically is like 80% of decks, thinking about it. So yeah, this is the 3rd best Call for Family Pokemon in the game now. But the fact that it is free and the fact that it is splashable actually is relevant. I could see this seeing play at some point in its lifespan. I think while we have Drizzile and Cincino, both of those are obviously better, but when they rotate, Mincino and Sobble get way worse, so this could be the new Call for Family Pokemon that people try out. Just not having to attach an energy is really, really cool. And then Hisuian Basculegion, Grudging Dive for 1 energy does 30. And if any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack during your last turn, this does 90 more damage and confuses the opponent. 1 for 120 isn't bad, but again, it's nothing to write home about, to be honest. The confusion isn't that relevant. We have so many switching outs right now. It's not huge. So yeah, I think it's a bit flashy, to be honest. Looks cool, but a bit flashy. Keldeo has Line Force that does 10 plus 20 for each of your bench Pokemon, so capping at 110 is pretty bad, unfortunately, and it's a 2 energy attack cost, which isn't great. But look at the art, how happy he is. Sparkling Greninja, I discussed this card at length in the last video, so I'm going to be pretty speedy with this one. Again, it's a Sparkling Pokemon, so you can only have one per deck. The ability is Concealed Card. Once during a turn, you may discard an energy from your hand, then draw 2 cards. That's pretty powerful in a lot of different decks. A lot of decks like Energy Discard, they synergize well with it. Things like Melanie, things like Moltres, things like Magma Basin, all of these like energy in the discard pile. Yeah, as well as Dark Patch and Metal Sorcerer as well, thinking about it. So yeah, a lot of really, really cool applications of this card. I could see this seeing play in a variety of different decks, to be honest. Any of those decks that I've just mentioned, I think, could feasibly play it as a one-off. Well, it has to be a one-off, but like feasibly play it for some extra draw power here and there. It's not like trade or anything. You're not always going to have the energy, but any deck that basically has discard synergy with energy cards, I could very easily see this being played, to be honest. The only caveat is decks that the last Sparkling Pokemon is a damage modifier, so the only caveat is decks that would benefit from Sparkling Hawlucha's damage modifier, which I don't think is a huge amount of decks, to be honest. There might be one or two, but I think Ice Rider is the only one that would probably prefer, or potentially prefer, Sparkling Hawlucha over Sparkling Greninja. I think the rest of those decks that I mentioned, or the rest of the decks that use those energy synergies that I mentioned, probably would like to play Sparkling Greninja. And then Moonlight Shuriken does 92 of your opponent's bench Pokemon if you discard 2 energy from this. Not really feasible, but there could be situations if you are playing this in water decks that this actually gets set up, and 290 snipes on a 1 prize Pokemon is pretty bonkers. So yeah. Jinx has Summoning Dance. Choose one of the opponent's bench Pokemon, switch it with their active. It's now confused, pretty bad. Hisuian Typhlosion V. This is the first Hisuian of the Hisuian starters. It looks like the Hisuian Pokemon, similar to the the Alolan Pokemon, are going to have free attacks, which is cool. Or some of them will have free attacks. Singe just auto burns something, which is interesting. Not huge, but I guess better than nothing. And then Shivering Flames for 2 Psychic and a Colourless. Does 120, and you choose a card from your opponent's hand without looking, and they shuffle it into their deck. This is weak to Dark, so it gets caught in the Mew Crossfire, which is unfortunate. And I think Shivering Flames just isn't enough damage output, but realistically, we're probably looking at this card for the V-Star. The V-Star has 260 HP, which is a bit better, but again, still weak to Dark, which is kind of awkward, because Darkrai looks to be pretty solid going forward. Hollow Flame does Psychic, Colourless does 180, and you put 3 damage counters on your opponent's benched Pokemon any way you like, so very similar to Dragapult. You trade 2 counters for 50 damage, but you also have to attach an extra energy. A little bit weaker, I would say. I would say Dragapult is more efficient, and yeah, so you're basically trading an energy for 30 damage, which I think isn't a worthwhile trade. Which is unfortunate. Shadow Roaster is the V-Star Power. If your opponent's active Pokemon has 4 damage counters on it, it is knocked out for a Psychic Energy. So obviously there's some synergy there with the attack, with things like Dragapult, with things like Zigzagoon and Inteleon and stuff. Just being able to get a raw knockout is pretty cool. Unfortunately, against one of the only VMAX decks, like you want this to trade up right into a VMAX, but unfortunately against one of the only VMAX decks that is hugely relevant here, you can't really do that because Mew can't be pinged. But it's pretty good for dealing with like these massive VMAXers like Duraludon and Stonejourner and Metagross and all of these ones that just look to be super tanky. Just being able to immediately take a KO is pretty powerful. Obviously they can heal off the damage pretty well, so you may potentially have to get that 4 damage counters in 1 turn, which seems difficult. But yeah, could be good against some of these bigger VMAX Pokemon. But yeah, definitely gets caught in the crossfire of being weak to Dark, so I think that will severely cap this card's playability. Its Magius has Ominous Chant. Your opponent reveals their hand. If they have more than 4 cards, if they have 4 or more cards, you choose cards until they only have 3 remaining. That's pretty troll. They shuffle them back into the deck. But yeah, that in combination with a path is pretty interesting. It means you can just pick out all of their path answers and leave them with a pretty crummy hand. Yeah, but it's a stage 1 that doesn't really accelerate the board state, so not going to be good enough in the majority of decks. Routes has potentially my favourite art of the set, just in the shadow of Mount Coronet. Building up to the Gallade, which has Buddy Catch. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it and put it into your hand. Pretty powerful, to be honest. Just being able to tutor a supporter is crazy. Altaria isn't seeing any play at all, but you have to draw the card. Altaria puts the supporter to the top right. You have to draw the card that you put to the top. So, yeah, this is better than Altaria, but it's a stage 2. So I don't think it's ever going to see play. I think it's too slow. But yeah, really, really interesting. Huge card for GLC and... well, maybe not GLC because there's other good Gallades, but... Cube. Huge card for Cube, to be honest. Really, really strong card for Cube. In fact, too strong, because Helix Cutter does 160 for 3. So yeah, too strong for Cube, even. But yeah, don't think it's going to see play in Standard, unfortunately. Diancie. This was a card that I first read a different translation for and lost my mind about. Turns out it's way toned down. So Diancie has the ability Princess Curtain that says as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, whenever your opponent plays a supporter card from their hand, prevent all effects of this card done to your bench basic Pokemon. So this was initially translated as when this is on your board, prevent all effects of your opponent's supporter cards on your Pokemon, which would have been crazy because it would have completely written off Boss. I couldn't understand how they would print that card, and it turns out that was a mistranslation, and in fact this has to be active, and it only affects benched basic Pokemon. So yeah, considerably worse, to the point where I think this card is almost unplayable. It has Spike Draw, which means it's like not doing nothing for a colourless. A little bit of damage, draw a couple of cards. But I think this card is pretty unplayable, unfortunately. Could be good in like one prize decks to stop you getting Boss, but I think a lot of one prize decks have Call for Family Pokemon to kind of mitigate that issue anyway. And Diancie is really not a good card to be playing in the mid to late game. Excuse me. In the mid to late game of your of your one prize Pokemon deck, because a lot of these decks require extra consistency cards and stuff like that. So yeah, not good enough on reflection. But when this was revealed, I was actually awake for this reveal, and when this was revealed last night, and it said, as long as this is on the board, prevent all effects your opponent's supporter card to your Pokemon, I was like, oh my goodness me, this is cracked. It turns out it's not as cracked as I thought, but probably. Like, this would have been staple in everything, right? I can't, like, basically other than Mew. Yeah. So this was another card that, like, I thought this is how they're toning down Mew, by basically giving decks other cards, because you can play this in Mew. It might even be worth it in Mew should that have been the original translation. But yeah, anyway, we're talking about a translation that isn't real. So yeah. A lot worse than initially revealed. Still quite interesting. I think it's only good in single prize decks though. Oh, that's not true. But I don't know how consistent. Like, do you want to play 4 of these? Do you want to spend Ball Search on these to be able to just stop your opponent bossing you turn 2? Would you rather just spend Ball Search on getting a second of your main attacker out? Maybe not, because this is a forced 1 prize. Okay, this is a forced 1 prize. Maybe it's not as terrible as I thought. Well, I didn't think it was terrible. I just didn't think it was good enough to see play. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe this is the way we force a 1 prize. You've got to think things like Mew and stuff are better though, right? But then they can just boss around the baby Mew. Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting card. Weirdeer has Fast Paced. Once during a turn you may draw a card. This is actually a huge card for the Eldegoss control decks. So far in our testing of early Brilliant Stars, the Eldegoss control decks basically lose because they can't draw enough cards in the loop at the end of the game. It literally just needs a once during a turn you may draw 1 card. So Weirdeer could be the answer to that. Problem is, it means you've got a Weirdeer on the board, which means your opponent has a way of like taking more prizes, which is what the deck tries to avoid. So it still probably isn't good enough. But yeah. Outside of that, we have better draw support right now. When Cincino goes, maybe Weird Ear is a bit of a better... or is like a new... Oh, we still have trade though on Lipard, but you can't level ball Lipard. Interesting. I don't think this is strong enough, to be honest, as a draw engine. It's also on stage 1, which is kind of awkward. But yeah, in like obviously we've got 3 or 4 sets, or 2 or 3 sets between now and rotation, and when we lose Inteleon and Cincino. So maybe it will be, to be honest. Like a lot of stuff could change between now and then. And then extra sensory does 40 plus 80. That's just not enough damage. You have to have the same number of cards as your opponent, but 2 for 120 isn't enough damage, even on a 1 prize Pokemon. Yeah, it's just not strong enough. Yeah, I'm trying to work out whether are there any decks that would prefer this, that don't want to discard cards with Cincino. I'm pretty sure Cincino is just an upgrade to this in every single way, because you have Call for Family, you're level ball searchable, and you're ditching dead resources. So yeah, this card I'm pretty sure is going to see no play at least until we lose Cincino. And maybe even then Lipard is still better, even though it's not level ball searchable and doesn't have Call for Family, just because you're drawing an extra card and ditching resources. So yeah, interesting. Classic Riperia with a 1 attack and a 4 attack. Earthwrecker does 50 and then you discard the top card of your deck. If it's an energy, you do 100 more damage and attach it to this Pokemon, which is pretty funny. 1 for 150 is a lot of damage, but realistically... yeah, it's a stage 2, you know, this isn't going to be happening. You play things like Orangaroo to get this to the top, but yeah, this isn't going to be happening. And then 4 for 180 is also pretty pants. Relicanth has Deep Dive. Choose up to 2 basic energy from your discard pile, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Pretty slow. Hippopotas, a great Hippo art. Look at that, brilliant. But yeah, Hippopotas and Hippowdon are both pretty mediocre. Sparkling Hawlucha is the final Sparkling Pokemon. Has the ability Big Match. If this Pokemon is on your bench, your Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon VMAX. So this is a permanent choice belt against VMAXs if it's on your bench. Immediate cards that stand out to me are Ice Rider, because it means that you can 310 a Mew way easy. You don't have to play Leon anymore, which was always like the weak link of that card. You can just Hawlucha plus Belt. You can one-shot a Mew with Max Lance, I think the attack is called. That to me is the biggest thing. Being able to one-shot a Mew is huge. There's probably other decks that can do it now as well. I don't think either of the fleet-footed legendary beasts can any more than they can just playing like the Ludicolo package they've been known to play. I think it's much of a benefit for those. What other decks like this? I mean, realistically, this is splashable and everything, right? You can play this in whatever to just improve your numbers. I'm just trying to work out whether, like, the key number I feel is trying to hit, pushing into 310. So yeah, any deck that can do 280 right now can potentially do 310 to a Mew, which is pretty cool. Can't think of anything else off the top of my head. People are probably screaming at me in the comments right now, but yeah, the one that stands out is obviously Ice Rider, right? Very, very cool for Ice Rider. Anything else that does 250? I can't think of anything else that does 250. Interesting. But yeah, like I say, I think a lot of the decks will want to play Greninja anyway. There's a lot of synergy to Greninja in a lot of decks. So yeah. But yeah, Big Match is huge. I think just for Ice Rider alone, it's pretty big, and it means the card will see play. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether we get more of these sparkling Pokemon going forward. Obviously, we've only seen 3, and they kind of made a big deal out of them, and then revealed 2 of the 3 initially. So it'll be interesting to see whether we see more sparkling Pokemon going forward. Kind of hope we do. We have Hisuian Decidueye V. 220 HP, Mountain Hunt, search your deck for up to 2 cards, put them in your hand. Again, fairly... it's okay. Obviously, it's better than doing nothing, right? Point Blank Shot. This does 100 damage. Okay, there's no damage on here. 3 energy for 100 is pretty weak. Go through all effects, though, so that's nice to have just in case. Okay, decidueye V-Star. Some sort of feather. 160 damage, discard up to 3 energy cards. They have to be energy cards. Okay, that's kind of awkward. 250 is, again, a decent number. We've just said 250 is a great number to be hitting. So, decidueye... yeah, decidueye with a choice belt and a Lucha, discarding 3 energies from hand can one-shot a Mew. But you have to have 3 energy. Yeah, this seems very, very convoluted, which is a shame. Yeah, I think this is a bit too weak, to be honest. And then wins and cloudstar. During your turn, you may draw cards until you have 8 cards in your hand. So, V-Star Power is not bad, to be honest. Gets you out of Marnie, gets you out of Roxanne, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Somersault Feather is not consistent enough, I think, to realistically be doing good damage. Cleavor has Lumberjack Hag. We've actually already looked at this one. Flip 2 coins. If both heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is knocked out. Too inconsistent, to be honest, but a pretty funny attack. Corefish has Thorn Rush that technically has infinite damage for no energy, which is crazy. Overquill has Intense Poison, which poisons for 5. But again, not really strong enough. I think the other Overquill is better. Poochyena has also a great art. Look at him having a little sniff in the snow. Love to see it. Mightyena is a really interesting one. Hustle Bark. If your opponent has any Pokemon VMAX in play, this Pokemon's attack cost is CCC less, so 3 colourless less. And then the attack is 160. So this does one-shot a Mew for free if they have a VMAX in play. Don't sleep on this. This is huge. Unfortunately, I don't think this is going to be good enough in other matchups, really. But this is like such an anti-Mew card. If they're playing Mew VMAX, KO them. Pretty funny. Obviously, you do 50 damage to yourself, which isn't ideal. It still probably doesn't mean Mew can... it's not even that strong against Mew though, right? Because they can just stay 2 priors and you then can't attack. So as much of an anti-Mew card this looks like, it's actually not that strong against Mew as long as they're sensible by shuffling their VMAXs in it for the most part. So yeah, pretty funny. Huh. But yeah, pretty funny anti-Mew card. That's not really an anti-Mew card, I guess. Absol has Sweeping Calamity that does 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon for a Dark. And then Claw Rend does 50 plus 70 if they have any damage counters on them already. So 120 for 2. But again, these sorts of attacks have never been particularly powerful. Dark's a good type if they have 1 damage counter on them already. This with a Choice Belt. Okay, this with a Choice Belt and they have 1 damage counter on them already does, again, KO a Mew, which is pretty interesting. I don't know how we're powering this up. Raihan, I guess. You have to have Sweeping Calamity'd or got a counter on in another way, though. But this does actually one-shot a Mew, which is interesting. I'm just not sure how we're powering it up. But, yeah. Huh. A bit better than I initially thought. I thought this was 10 damage short, but it's not. 120, 240, 120... Yeah, this does one-shot a Mew. Interesting. Kind of ought to power it from nothing, though. Would have to Raihan, to be honest. But yeah, could be a little bit more interesting than I was initially giving it credit for. Hisuian Samurott V has 220, has Zigzag Drop as the first attack, discard up to 2 Pokemon tools, attach your opponent's Pokemon in play, pretty weak to be honest, and then Shadow Slash does 180, discard an energy from this Pokemon. You have to basically... Oh wait, we have Dark Patch. Hold on, what am I saying? We have Dark Patch. Huh. Okay, this could be very, very interesting. This Absol actually has piqued my interest a little bit. I was completely forgetting about Dark Patch. So yeah, Absol could be cool. Yeah, we have to basically consider all Dark Pokemon slightly differently, right? Because we have Dark Patch right now. But yeah, even so, this is still a pretty expensive attack. Yeah. The V-Star is a very, very interesting one, though. For 2 energy, does 110. But if your opponent has any damage counters on them already, this does 220 instead. So that's KOing basically every single V Pokemon. because you're doing at the end of the turn 230. If you then think about that further, with a choice belt, you're doing 260 to the V-Star Pokemon, which means you're only 10 damage short from one-shotting V-Stars, which, if you're playing Inteleons instead of Zigzagoons, perhaps, that's fairly plausible. You can do 270. 280 is still a little bit out of range, but still definitely possible. And it's all for 2 energy as well, and it's dark patchable, so you can get this set up in a turn as long as you have a Samurott on the board the turn before. So yeah, seems like a very, very strong card, to be honest. Moon Cutting Star places 4 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon, so you can use this as kind of... Oh, okay, that works. Because my initial worry was getting Inteleons out, but actually, your first Hisuian Samurott can just Moon Cutting Star to get the damage on to KO, because that is 260. The belt, that's 290. It's pretty good damage. So you can Moon Cutting Star for the first one while you're building up your Drizzars, and then you can get an Inteleon in play and be able to Moon Cutting Star and be able to Inteleon ping, and then Merciless Blade. So yeah, Hisuian Samurott seems really strong, to be honest. I kind of was very underwhelmed by the V-Star power when I first read it, but it actually synergizes pretty well with Inteleons, because you can't ping early with Inteleons. Interesting. Cool. I'm pretty glad this one's playable. I think this is playable. I'm pretty glad about that. Yeah, interesting. And also this can obviously clean up KOs later on down the line as well. So yeah, Garchomp V reminds me of Flygon V. Instead of, well, Flygon does 320 to a VMAX Pokemon. This does 220 to any Pokemon. You can snipe it. Unfortunately, I think it's going to fall down to the same fate as Flygon, because Flygon can just be gusted when you're trying to power it up, and the exact same can happen with Garchomp, which is pretty pants. So yeah, I think it's unfortunately not strong enough. We haven't seen Flygon be great, but it has some interesting applications, and a 220 snipe is pretty interesting. But yeah, I still think this is going to fall down to the same fate as Flygon. You have to pair this with Arceus and like realistically, right? I mean, you can Melanie, Gutsy Pickaxe, attach, but you you probably have to pair this with Arceus. Let's be honest. It has Lookout as long as this Pokemon is in play. Basic energy attached to your benched Pokemon can't be discarded by the effects of your opponent's items and supporters. So this is like Baby Carbink from back in the day. Carbink saw some play, to be honest, in heavy hammer meta. I'm still not sure how heavy hammers will be in this meta, but it's going to be one that people can splash in if they are getting a bit worried about hammers and stuff. So yeah, again, it's another card that obviously one of the biggest decks that hates hammers is Mew. Admittedly, they only play 2 basic energies, so it's not that big of a deal. But it's another card that Mew can't play that other decks can to get around the people countering Mew with hammers. So yeah, you can kind of see how they're trying to push us away from Mew by giving a lot of other archetypes, a lot of other things. Yeah, and then I think this is the last relevant card, is Miltank, Miraculous Body. Prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon V. So this was the other one that I was mentioning about that spray. Obviously, this is pretty boring, let's be honest. It's pretty difficult to get through a multitude of these. But the attack isn't hugely powerful, so decks probably will be able to find ways to get through this. Mew isn't bothered by this. And a lot of other decks play things like Inteleon and stuff. So I think this actually only bothers decks like... I actually can't work out a deck that wouldn't really like to see a Miltank in their face. Mew has wall breaking. Arceus decks can always tutor out cards to deal with it. They have to play them, but if this becomes relevant, they just do play them, and they can always find them on the exact turn. And a lot of them play 1 prize Pokemon anyway because they want to play a 7 prize game. so that just becomes an attacker rather than a setup Pokemon. Duraludon is a pure V Pokemon but has wall breaking. Inteleon decks don't care about this. So yeah, I really can't see many decks that don't have an answer to this. Whether they have an answer for 4 of these is a different question. But obviously Mew and Duraludon both have wall breaking, so they're never going to be affected by this. So yeah, it's basically just whether Arceus decks can play enough outs to dealing with 4 Miltank as to whether this will become like a quad boring deck. But yeah, the attack isn't great in all honesty, so it's going to be difficult for them to deal with like a Pokemon that they've set up to try and get through you, because they can control your damage output. Kickabout does 20 more damage for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon, so they can control your damage output, so they can just make sure you're never one-shotting their one prize answer. So yeah, Miltank actually seems pretty pants. I can't like it. Obviously, this could be this. You look at this and you're like, oh, quad walls, boring deck. But I don't think realistically that is something that's going to be plausible with this. I think it's too many ways around it, unfortunately. But yeah, so really interesting cards. To be honest, I think one of the biggest winners is actually Samurott. I think Samurott is one of the best cards. Sparkling Greninja is obviously really, really good. Outside of that, there's actually not too much in terms of Pokemon. The trainers are obviously nuts though. Roxanne, I think, is very powerful. But yeah, not the most overwhelming set, but definitely some really interesting cards, and some cards that will benefit decks other than Mew, which is how I see them trying to direct us away from Mew over the next few sets, is just giving other decks powerful stuff that Mew can't play. So yeah, really, really interesting stuff. But yeah, thanks very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video soon. Cheers.